Stay there. I've got a few questions for Brooke, then we're going to open it up to everybody. So first of all, let's talk about the total cost.
Okay.
Some would say $1 billion. Why do we need to spend $1 billion? Why don't we just cut out the waste and not spend so much? Why do we really need to spend that? Others would say the real need is $4 to $5 billion. This doesn't even come close. So answer both sides of that question. This is very important.
Okay. So I guess the answer is, let me start with do we really need $1 billion? Why don't we cut out the waste? When we looked at this plan, we cut out all of the waste. Basically, because Georgia is a growing metro area, because we've been underinvesting in our transportation system, we do need that $1 billion a year. Unfortunately, building roadways, operating transit systems is not cheap. And in order to get it right and actually serve and actually reduce congestion, this is the amount we need to spend. I should add, I think there's some places and maybe some schools of thought that we're going to spend this money and we don't know if it's going to do anything. This plan is actually going to reduce congestion. We're not spending this money just to spend it. And so we've looked at the models, we've looked at what's worked in other areas that are similar to Atlanta, and so we really think on an annual basis we need about $1 billion a year to actually accomplish our needs. Now, how about $4 or $5 billion? So if we were going to build elaborate things we don't need and have all kinds of amazing monorails and things that are maybe not cost effective, I suppose we could find a way to spend $5 billion. But my goal here is not to spend as much taxpayer money as possible. My goal is to spend as little while actually creating the system that we need. And I think this amount of money, this $1 billion a year, plus the financing tools, which really means it's more than $1 billion a year in terms of actual money that we have to play with, is going to solve our system, going to solve our congestion issues, and really going to put us in the area we need to be. So we are competitive with Dallas, we are competitive with Miami, we are competitive with the other areas that are our peers.
Second question is, you've got 6.7, 6.8 billion, not an insignificant amount of money. It's around $350 million per year on average from this public-private partnerships and private financing and toll revenues. How do we maximize that? It seems to me that's a good thing because it's optional and provides more capacity without raising taxes.
Yeah, and so I think the trick there is it's going to be as much as possible entering into public-private partnerships, using TIFIA loans, which are federally backed loans, using private activity bonds in order that we can get as much of this revenue as possible. I actually knocked down the private figure a little bit to try to be conservative in terms of the amount. So, in some cases, I want to make sure that this is actually a number that we think is attainable. But through using public-private partnerships and through careful planning and through using fully financing tools, going through full RFQs and RFPs, I think we'll be able to get all that money.
Okay. Last question. Both our organization and perhaps you have heard the argument that we're anti-transit. And I tell people we're not anti-transit, we're anti-spending money in a wasteful way based on our circumstances. How do you respond to the fact that are we anti-transit?
Sure. Well, I certainly don't think we're anti-transit, either of the organizations. I actually like to say that what we're trying to do is we're trying to improve the transit network for everyone. One of the challenges of building rail lines is that for the amount of money it takes to build a rail line, light rail or heavy, you can build anywhere between 3 and 9 bus rapid transit lines. And so the problem is you're only covering with that one rail line a limited part of the metro area. We need to have a reliable transit option for all of the metro area, not just the folks who are lucky enough to get it in the next 10 years. And I think we've seen some debates in the past over this person gets their rail line and I don't get my line and back and forth. The idea is to provide as much coverage for the metro area as possible, and that's really what a bus system does. I would also add that I am on the Transportation Research Board Bus Transit Systems Committee, which is a part of the Public Transit Group. So I don't think they'd let me on that committee if I was anti-transit, I'm fairly sure. So yeah, but this system really is about maximizing mobility for everybody. It's not just about putting a line in the place that's politically lucky enough to get it.
And the other thing I would point out is that, this is a 30-year plan. We talk about autonomous vehicles and the technology, it's coming. We don't know when the lawyers are going to allow us to use it, but, this recognizes that that can certainly play a role. We think it's going to play a big role. So a lot of the issues we face today, we may not down the road, transit and other perspective based on technology. All right, Ron, you had your hand out. You start us off.
Sure. So, Ron, generally, I am not advocating one mode or the other, although I do think what I call a fixed guideway is often called BRT heavy, and then when you have BRT that's sort of in a lane that it shares with cars, we typically call that BRT light. I like BRT light assuming it is used with traffic signal priority, and that is a big must. No traffic signal priority doesn't work as well. So if you go to the BRT light, you have to use that. But generally, that's what I'm looking for. And again, it's more bang for the buck. BRT heavy, there's certainly some corridors in Atlanta that it might be feasible for. But where you can implement BRT light, just because of the cost advantages, just because you don't have restricted turns in the median and all sort of these other issues, I'm really a bigger fan of that.
Thank
Jim.
you. You're looking for a lot of revenue from managed lanes. Are these new managed lanes, or are you going to be facing off as the political issues that you had with converting 3 lanes to pay lanes?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We are not going to convert any free lanes to pay lanes. Exactly for that reason is because it's politically tough. These are all new managed lanes, and so in the new managed lanes, we're actually talking about another lane. So even for folks in the general purpose lanes, these are going to relieve congestion because you're basically adding 2 lanes to the freeway. And anytime you do that, you are going to relieve congestion. But because we're using these pricing options, we'll be able to keep them non-congested 24 hours a day and hopefully also cut down somewhat on the concept of induced demand. So yeah, these are all new lanes that we get the revenue from by making new lanes.
We have the head of Greta and CERTA with us today if you have any specific questions. Kyle?
You said this would free up some money for maintenance. The number that GDOT has out there is something like $600 million a year. How much does your plan free up for maintenance? How does it compare to that, and why? If there's a difference, why is there a difference?
Sure. So my plan takes the existing money that they're spending on maintenance and also takes the existing amount of money in their budget that they're spending on new construction, which I believe is about 25%, but don't quote me on that figure because I know it depends, and uses that money for maintenance. So my total is, I guess, slightly lower than GDOT's total. We do a report every year that looks at annual highway costs and how much it costs GDOT to actually maintain their roads. And GDOT does a fantastic job of maintaining their roads at a great level, really excellent conditions. So I guess I think GDOT is maybe being overly conservative on how much they need to maintain. I agree with them that we need to keep the roads and maintenance in good shape, but I'm thinking maybe say 450 to 500 million as opposed to 600 million. I will also add that we have a few differences in our plan compared to GDOT in terms of the new construction. They've got some roads in South Georgia that they're looking at widening that I'm not necessarily sure I see the justification for right now. So our new capital expenses on those types of facilities might be slightly less than theirs are as well, and I think that helps close the gap.
So that'd be 25% of the state and federal revenue.
I believe so, but don't quote me on that, Kyle, because I'm not sure. But I know they spend a significant amount of money right now on new construction. They're it's not as much as we need, but they're not in as tough a position as some other DOTs. So shifting all of that money, or most of that money, to maintenance is going to be a big bang for the buck. So the question is, how much money from the federal government are we projecting? I am assuming that federal government funding is going to stay largely constant. There's a question as to what's going to happen. As many of you know, federal government funding is uncertain. We're in a surface transport. Our current policy, which has been extended once, is going to expire in May, and no is really going to happen. I am assuming that the level of federal government funding is going to stay constant and adjust for inflation. I don't think it's going to go up. For political reasons, I also don't think it's going to go down. Obviously, depending on what happens, that's a factor that we might need to look at. But one of the reasons I wanted to create this sort of what I would consider a pretty robust funding system, is just in case there is a significant loss of federal money, the state has a buffer.
Going back to buses, I've lived on Peachtree Road for many years, and I will say that those large MARTA buses generally go by with very low fill. And so my question is the focus going to be on smaller, more nimble type buses, which can get up to speed much more quickly and don't seem to take up as much room on the road? And also, please tell me that the streetcar plan that was going to take out one lane either way is not in, I keep hearing rumblings of it being resurrected, which would be ridiculously stupid.
Yeah, I am not a fan of streetcars, because when you look at streetcars, they're really not about transportation. They're about economic development. And even in the studies that I've seen, there was a great study of Portland, which perhaps is very well known for its streetcar. They found that what it really did was it moved the development from one block to the other. It didn't really induce new development. So in this suggestion, no, there are no streetcars. I'm not a fan of streetcars. When it comes to the buses, I think that's a great solution, looking at smaller buses, also looking where it's feasible. I don't know that it would be on Peachtree, but in some of the suburban and exurban communities, demand response transit via taxi, via van pools. I didn't put, there's more of that in the full report. I didn't put all that in here because obviously it's a limited amount of time. But yeah, and hopefully MARTA is going to be looking at that. I think they've been, they've been under new management for the past few months, and I think they've been a lot better than they've been in a while. And so I think that's a great idea to actually right-size the transit vehicle to the neighborhood, because it really doesn't make a lot of sense to operate a huge bus if there's only 10 people on it.
Clint?
Yeah, you're talking about several years ago, starting to look at this. You, Jim, and so many others contributed to that. A lot of times, a little factoid helps illustrate an issue. You talk about why are we perceived as anti-transit? It's not being anti-transit. The North Line MARTA extension, almost 20 years ago, cost $200 million per mile. So $1 billion plan, 5 miles, you've eaten up your entire year's budget on it. And obviously, when you factor that cost per rider, it's exponential compared to 1 lane mile of road. And so that number is just so staggering to a lot of people. When they hear it, they're like, whoa, is that really true? It is. And then I want to say a good word for ITS. We don't realize over half of congestion in Metro Atlanta is incident related, whether it's a wreck or a planned wreck, which is a traffic light that holds for 35 minutes. And you drive through Alexandria, Virginia on US 1, and you can go from one side of town to the other in about 2.5 minutes. You've probably ridden that road many times.
I have that. That's actually was just in my mind about one of the best roads I've been on. That's a great point. Absolutely.
Amen. I drill up there with the Navy every month, and I can drive right through Alexandria in rush hour in less time than it takes me to go from here across the street sometimes in Atlanta. And so ITS is such important bang for the buck. It is such a huge, return on investment. Otherwise, thanks for what you're doing, because I think a lot of times people don't understand the scale of the problem or how much is going to have to be done to get us back where we need to be. And the positive vision back 20 years ago, Economist Magazine said the Atlanta to Charlotte corridor was the next great megapolis on Earth. And we've kind of been stuck in this recession. Now we're coming out of it. We can kind of return to sort of vision, and this is going to be such a huge part of it.
Let me take the first part of that. If you scroll back to the map, the transit map,
Sure.
he made the point that the last MARTA extension that we did cost $200 million a mile. It's the expense of heavy rail. So if you can build this with rail, show me the price tag. I just don't think we can't afford it. Rail is great if you get the rail station, but for everybody else, we don't have enough room. We have not enough money in the budget. That doesn't say that we can't expand MARTA rail in certain places, like going to Emory. You're not going to build. There's no place for a managed lane through Druid Hills. There's some people that would be picketing DOT if you're putting a managed lane through Druid Hills. So that's not going to happen. But what we're trying to say is the network is important, and the bus-based system is going to be the most flexible and the cheapest, and it can be high quality of service if you run it frequently. And the ITS, you made the point that 50% of the delays often caused by accidents. And Georgia has done a great job with the Hero vehicles and others, but we can even do more with the ITS.
Yeah, it is a great question. Oftentimes, it's not the buses, the drivers themselves that have the clickers, but it's they'll hit a sort of something in the roadway. And the smart systems now don't always give the bus a green light as soon as it gets there. It takes into consideration the cross streets, because you're right, obviously we don't want to overly, have people at those cross streets waiting 5 minutes. Generally speaking, we found that with good traffic signal synchronization, and my experience, Cobb County does a pretty good job on many of their streets, with some of the good traffic signal engineers, we're able to get it fairly good so that bus might have to wait, say, 15 seconds at an intersection, but that is all the bus has to wait, and it doesn't cause the cross streets to back up. It allows the traffic signal synchronization to stay in place. This is not like, there's some states, I know Florida has this, where all of the emergency responders have those clicker things, and when they go through an intersection and it turns red, it's like red for a minute and it totally messes up the system. Not that you don't want to get someone in an ambulance to the hospital in time, but all factors considering. This is sort of the next wave of technology where they're able to cut down the delays for everyone. Okay, so let me try to answer all of those first. Let me go in order. I hope I remember them all. So the answer to your first question is, yeah, I think what you're doing there in Cordele is great. The growth in the ports, if you look at the projections, are so immense that I think we're going to need all of the above. But that's not to say that we can't use some more of that innovative type thinking, and I think that's a great economic development opportunity, for South Georgia as well. In terms of the 4-lane roads, I totally agree with you with the US, what is that, US 19, right, 1941. That actually, I believe, is one of the managed arterials. I know I have some bus service on there. So that corridor, the one in Clayton County, which I know is a problem because I've used it too avoiding I-75, is definitely one of the ones that we're going to improve. And I think the point about the 4-laning of US 19 is a good one in that a lot of these roads already have 4 lanes, but there's a few little bottlenecks and trouble spots that we need to address, and those really would make a big difference. Third question. So our plan does not do anything to the local SPLOST funding. It keeps it in place. My perspective has always been the regions that passed that was their decision, and they wanted to pass it, and that's fine, and we shouldn't be coming in and doing anything to them that disadvantages them because they decided to pass it, so to speak. So, yeah.
Well, we have run 5 minutes over. I don't want to keep everyone. We'll be here. I know Brooke can stick around and answer any specific questions. Thank you all for coming. I hope to see you March 18th.